So as of the time that this video goes up, it has been about 2 weeks since my review of Battlestar Galactica Season 1, and that includes the 3-hour miniseries pilot. My initial rating of that season was that I enjoyed it pretty well. I did think that it was a little strange that the series was calling itself Battlestar Galactica when there was so much that was different about this version of the series and the original Battlestar Galactica, including tone. I thought that they could have almost gotten away with calling it something entirely different, and they could have done that and still had the fan base that they had. That was one of my only complaints. Other than that, I thought that Season 1 was pretty good. I don't know where exactly in Season 2 I started hating this show, but around 3/4 of the way through this season, I was just about ready to stop watching, period. I didn't even want to watch the last 3 episodes of this season. That's how much I was really hating this series by the end of Season 2. What's really funny is if you take any random episode of Season 1 and any random episode of Season 2 and compare them, the quality is not going to be all that different between the 2 seasons. It's strange when you look at it on an episode by episode basis. A lot of the episodes from the 2 seasons are fairly similar in quality. It's not like if you compare, say, an episode from Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 1 and Buffy Season 3, you can very easily tell that these are very different shows, and it's changed a lot over the years, even just a couple of years. This show is not like that. It's still very similar in tone. A lot of the characters are fairly consistent from how they acted in Season 1. I will get to that in a minute. It's just strange that I hated this season so much more than Season 1 when there's not a whole lot that's different between the 2 seasons. One of the first big problems that I have with this season is the introduction of various plot lines, and then subsequently this series starts ignoring all of these plot lines. For example, Gaius Baltar is asked to be Laura Roslin's vice president. Nothing is done with this until the last 1/4 of this season. Baltar is stranded on Kobol. Why would the Cylon that Gaius Baltar sees in his head and he later finds out is definitely not in collusion with the real Cylons want him stranded on Kobol? Sam Anders and the Freedom Fighters stuck on Caprica. Starbuck meets Sam and the rest of these Freedom Fighters at the beginning of Season 2. And then throughout all of Season 2, I think there is exactly one mention of going back to rescue these guys until the end of this season. Starbuck's time in the farm while she was on Caprica. It is mentioned at least once that she was kept in captivity on that farm, but the writers seem to have forgotten that the Cylons performed unnecessary surgery on Starbuck and possibly implanted something inside her. The characters at least seem to think that in the episode where she was their captive. Whatever happened to that storyline? Some of these plot lines are picked up again later on, some of them are not. For example, Sam Anders, he does get rescued eventually, but a lot of the stuff that happens in this season, you have to wonder, okay, this isn't such a major thing that the fleet has to worry about that they couldn't go and rescue Sam and the rest of those Freedom Fighters right now. The only real reason that they are not rescuing those guys is that they needed something big to happen at the end of Season 2, so for no real reason at all, everyone in the fleet is saying let's not rescue those guys yet until the end of Season 2. Gaius Baltar as Vice President. I honestly have no idea why they wanted that plotline set up so early, since they did literally nothing with it until over half of Season 2 was already done with. Then, by the time they finally start doing stuff with it, it's very clear that they don't really have anything for him to do as Vice President. They just wanted him to be Vice President so they could move him up to being President at the end of Season 2. Honestly, this didn't feel like an organic plot point. In my review of the Doctor Who storyline, The Aztecs, I talked about how conflict needs to be organic. And in this series, a lot of it is starting to not feel organic. For example, Gaius Baltar becomes vice president only because Laura Roslin really needs him to be. He finds politics to be very boring, and then when he finds out much later that she doesn't trust him, suddenly he wants to be the president only to spite Roslin. This really didn't seem like something that was thought out very much in advance, if you ask me. Something else that I was starting to have a problem with in this season. Every time on Previously on Battlestar Galactica, they add scenes that were not in the previous episodes. They only point out to us how inept they are at executing a long-form series. Look, we meant to put this scene in that last episode, but we forgot every single time. And that's really a problem. When you are doing what is essentially a 4-year movie, you really don't need to forget every week to put important details in the episodes that you are working on that are going to be referenced later on. And then when you do forget to put those scenes in those episodes, suddenly you have a problem because the episode you are working on this week needs to be referencing something that you cut out of the previous episode. This is something that becomes much more evident when you are binge watching and watching 3 or 4 episodes a day as opposed to 1 episode a week, where it might be possible that people are going to forget what happened in the previous episode, so they are not necessarily going to say, hey, wait a minute, where did that happen? That never did happen. That's something that I found myself saying a lot when I was watching this series on Netflix. Something else that I was having a problem with this season is characters who are much more inconsistent than they were in Season 1. For example, Commander Adama is talking to Chief Tyrrell about Boomer. He says something to the effect of, she was one of us, she was more than a machine, she is not just a machine. And then he tells Tyrrell, there are more copies of her, you will see her again. This sounds to me like Adama, even though he was recently shot by Boomer, he's more or less okay with her, and if he ever saw her again, he would accept her as part of his crew. The very next time that he sees Boomer, he tries to strangle her. This is not something that is done by the man who said she was more than just a machine. Another example of inconsistent character work, Rosalind seems totally okay with Gaius Baltar, then suddenly she can't trust him and she hates his guts. And about this, one of the dumbest things in this entire season happens around the time when everyone thinks that Rosalind is about to die. Baltar reads a letter that she wrote for him where she says that she and him have had their differences ever since he became vice president, and she gives him some advice for when he becomes president. When she said this, my jaw nearly hit the floor. When have you two had any differences at all? Between Baltar being stranded on Kobol for 4 or 5 episodes, and the whole mutiny/Civil War thing that divided the fleet, you two haven't even had any interactions at all this season. When exactly did these differences between you two come up? And if you think he'd make an awful president, which you clearly do think, then just tell him that you used him to bolster your own political career, and don't try to act like you're a perfect little angel and he has done you some sort of grievous wrong, especially after he saved your life. Some other stuff that goes along this line of inconsistency in this show is not as much on a character level, but is inconsistency nonetheless. Kat goes from being a green pilot in Season 1 to being on par with Starbuck in terms of her flying capabilities, and even apparently the same rank as Starbuck. Apollo goes from captain to major to commander, all within 2 episodes, and then does nothing notable as commander, and then a 1-year time jump happens where we could have just waited to promote him to commander sometime during that time jump. Within 3 episodes, Apollo is with 3 different women, and is sleeping with all 3 of them within 4 episodes. Some of this stuff I had more of a problem with than others. For example, Apollo sleeping with every single woman in the fleet, I can take it or leave it. If you want to say that Apollo is a slut, then I wish you would have established that at the beginning of the series instead of suddenly throwing that in our face in the middle of Season 2. It feels really weird when he's sleeping with a prostitute in 1 episode. In the very next episode, he almost sleeps with Starbuck, and then 2 episodes after that, he's sleeping with Dee. It feels really strange, especially with the episode where he's sleeping with the prostitute. That's basically just a parallel to a girlfriend we didn't know he had back on Caprica, and we had never heard of her before this episode, and we will never hear of her again. And then Dee, that relationship basically came out of nowhere, and I really hated that relationship in a lot of different ways, but I won't get into that here. I wouldn't mind if this character is the kind of character who sleeps around a lot, but it just feels inconsistent with the kind of character who we had before this, who we saw didn't really sleep around with anyone. Sometimes, when dealing with a show that heavily emphasizes a long-spanning arc across multiple seasons with long brewing character arcs and character interactions, it's better when you watch 3 episodes a day, every day, until you finish the series, as opposed to the way the episodes came out, which is once a week with long breaks in between each episode. This series is not a series that is better when you watch it all at once. In fact, I would bet money that a lot of my criticisms about this season would go away if I watched the whole season over the course of a year instead of 2 weeks. It might be okay to have a lazy plot and half-butted character writing when people are waiting several days in between episodes, and even more so in between episodes that reference each other, when you have stuff from the beginning of the season coming back into play at the end. But we are coming into an era where this sort of bad writing is not going to work anymore, when more and more people will watch an entire season in a week or two, and in fact seasons of shows are even being released that way now. You don't have the luxury of making a crappy show and trying to make people think that it's not as bad as it is. I really hated this season, guys. I don't think I've ever gone from loving a show so much to hating it with every fiber of my being. Well, not since Lost anyway. I know a lot of people like to complain about this show really having an awful finale, but where were those people in Season 2 when it was being 50 shades of bad? Anyway, what do you guys think? Is this season as bad as I say, or is it alright? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you liked this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I'll be back tomorrow with a somewhat similar video. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.